Just so you know, this show is about scary stuff. So don't say I didn't warn you guys. And remember, don't be scared.
Episode 126, Gone But Not Forgotten, The Murder of Otis Elder. War Baby here with another episode of Murderous Minors. When a juvenile kills someone, the ripple effect through the families, friends, and community of those involved is immeasurable and incalculable. And this week on Murderous Minors, we look at the January 2022 murder of 38-year-old Otis Elder, a case that has quickly ballooned into a bona fide fiasco, spreading the ripples even farther. This episode does discuss gun violence, so please be advised. The second murder of 2022 in St. Paul, Minnesota occurred on January 10th at around 9:30 p.m. as 38-year-old Otis R. Elder was leaving a recording studio. It was his 4-year-old daughter's birthday. He was heading directly to meet his family, including a 1-year-old son, at the birthday dinner, according to his fiancée.
The last words her dad told her was he loved her. She's so pretty. Happy birthday. He couldn't wait to see her. At about 9:20, he called me again on the phone, telling me he was gonna be on his way and to send him pictures of the kids. I sent pictures at 9:25. Otis' last words to me was at 9:28. Why everything is happening, he was just thinking about his kids. At 9:50, got the worst phone call of my life.
Court documents and security camera footage indicate that 2 individuals targeted Otis as he was inside his vehicle, preparing to leave the studio. One of his assailants actually got into the passenger side while the other flanked him on the driver's side. This person, quote, stepped back and a loud gunshot was heard. The male standing outside of Elder's door opened the driver's side door and picked up items from the ground and from the inside of Elder's vehicle, according to court documents. Officers responding to 911 calls found a gravely wounded man near his vehicle, lying in the street near Oakley and Pryor Avenues, in the Hamline Midway neighborhood of St. Paul, Minnesota. Otis Elder was pronounced dead soon after at Regions Hospital. Investigators used the traffic cam footage to identify the driver of the stolen car as 17-year-old Mekhi Speed. They matched the clothing that Otis Elder's killer wore to what Speed was wearing when he and his 3 accomplices abandoned the stolen car at the Lexington parking ramp near the downtown Minneapolis Bolero Flats apartments, where some of them lived. Once his identity was released, the press reported that Speed had just recently come off 30 days of monitored house arrest, stemming from charges of assault and minor in possession of a firearm from September 2020. In the originating incident, police said that Speed got into a fight with a man when he was 16. That man alleged that Speed retrieved a gun from his car and fired at him as he ran into an apartment complex nearby. The man was hit in the leg, and a witness said that Mekhi Speed was the shooter. The teen was charged with assault and pleaded guilty to what is known as extended juvenile jurisdiction, wherein his sentence of 3 years in adult prison was suspended provided he got treatment and did not break the terms of his probation or the law in any way. He went to the secure residential program at the West Central Regional Juvenile Treatment Center in Moorhead, Minnesota in December 2020 and completed it, but had already tested positive for marijuana 2 times by the following summer. Speed also didn't follow his post-release plan. He failed to attend school or schedule therapy appointments and didn't check in with his probation officer on a regular basis. This should have resulted in Mekhi Speed being sent to adult prison to serve his 3-year stint, but it did not. Though the judge stated that Speed's actions were, quote, intentional and inexcusable, she sent him home with his mother and an ankle monitoring device for the next 30 days. Toward the end of that period, the Mercedes was stolen, 2 days after Thanksgiving 2021. And between then and January 10, 2022, the vehicle was used in the commission of 3 armed robberies and was involved in a police pursuit before being spotted fleeing Otis Elder's murder scene. Security camera footage from the next day showed 4 teens leaving the Mercedes in that parking spot. 11 days later, on January 21st was when the stolen car was found abandoned, and fingerprints pulled from inside matched Speed and also 16-year-old Faisal Ali, the presumed passenger from the video. By January 24th, the Bolero Flats Apartments building manager had also identified Speed as the driver of the car, but they had yet to locate the teenager, and here's where the story gets doubly tragic. In preparation for his arrest, law enforcement determined that Speed had access to several apartments at the Bolero Flats because he lived there with his mom and his brother also lived there with his girlfriend in another unit. Another individual shown getting out of the car when it was abandoned was linked to another apartment in the building. On January 31st, 2022, a St. Paul police sergeant applied for 3 warrants to search the 3 apartments, to look for those teens, and to secure evidence linking them to Otis Elder's murder. Ominous details in the warrants stated that the, quote, underlying homicide involved the suspected use of a .223 caliber rifle, that the suspects had a history of assault and weapons possession charges, and that the suspects had recently posted a video depicting multiple firearms, including some with extended magazines. The sergeant was requesting ordinary, quote, knock-and-announce warrants, and also requested that the Minneapolis Police Department be the ones to execute them since the building was located in their city. At 6:35 a.m. the next day, Minneapolis police stated that they would do it, but only if they could execute them as, quote, no-knock warrants due to the risk factors, including, quote, the apartment was associated with a homicide suspect, that the firearm used in the homicide had not been recovered, that the vehicle used in the homicide was associated with other armed robberies, and that the apartment units in question may be occupied by other suspects or associates. A no-knock warrant is what was being executed in Louisville, Kentucky that led to the police shooting death of 26-year-old EMT Breonna Taylor as she lay asleep in her own bed. Officers involved said that they did announce themselves, but Breonna's boyfriend and the couple's neighbors said that they had not. No-knock warrants were implemented originally for drug busts, to give occupants 0 time to potentially dispose of evidence and to provide an element of surprise for the officer's safety. But it was approved by the judge for use in Otis Elder's murder investigation and scheduled to take place pre-dawn the following day, February 2, 2022. St. Paul police had not authorized such a raid since 2016. In the meantime, a Minneapolis police sergeant got the keys to the apartments they'd be searching the next day and proceeded to stake out the building. Police would later claim that during that reconnaissance, all 3 of their subjects were spotted. They were not taken into custody because the revised warrants had not come back yet. Execution of the first search warrant did recover a hat that police were looking for, which ultimately did have Speed's DNA on it. However, the second apartment search that morning yielded no one and nothing relevant to the investigation. Even at my age, I'm still learning new and hilarious things about my mother, which makes me glad that I got her StoryWorth, so some of these priceless tales can be preserved for years to come. StoryWorth is an online service that emails your mom a thought-provoking question of your choosing, like what were your grandparents like? And after a year, the weekly questions and stories along with photos are compiled into a beautiful keepsake book that your family can share for generations. I remember thinking it was adorable to hear about how mischievous my mom was as a kid, and I love discovering stories and memories I've never heard about. Give all the moms in your life a meaningful gift you'll both cherish for years. StoryWorth. Right now, for a limited time, you'll save $10 on your first purchase when you go to storyworth.com/warbaby. That's StoryWorth.com/warbaby to save $10 on your first purchase. storyworth.com/warbaby. Minneapolis police's SWAT team carried out the warrants, and body cam footage of the final search shows an officer silently opening the locked front door of the apartment belonging to Speed's brother's girlfriend before moving out of the way and becoming the fourth officer in the line of 10 officers who began to push inside. As the 10 officers marched past the kitchen and into the open living room, they're all shouting commands into the silent apartment like, quote, police department, get on the ground and search warrant. And as they approach a sectional sofa from behind and from the side, an officer kicks it, and a figure lying under a blanket on the couch can be seen stirring. At 6:48 a.m., only 10 seconds after police entered the apartment, Officer Mark Hanneman shouted, quote, show me your hands, and immediately fired at the person beneath the blanket. The figure had begun to roll over, and one hand could be seen pointing a gun, waving slightly around but mainly toward the floor, his trigger finger extended along the barrel in a non-shooting position. The officer said later that he fired 3 times, then stated, quote, he's got a gun. Underneath that blanket was Mekhi Speed's cousin, 22-year-old Amir Locke, who fell onto the floor and his hands were quickly zip-tied. When he was flipped back over, 3 bullet wounds were visible to his torso, at which time his restraint was removed and paramedics came in to treat him. Locke had actually received 5 gunshot wounds in total, to the wrist, face, shoulder, and chest. Amir Locke was pronounced dead at Hennepin County Medical Center, and his death sparked renewed police reform protests in Minneapolis, reminiscent of the aftermath of George Floyd's murder in May 2020 and the shooting death of Daunte Wright in April 2021, both of which involved officers from the very same department. Neither of those deaths had involved a no-knock warrant, of course, but Breonna Taylor's explosive death had. Louisville, Kentucky banned their police department from continuing to employ the tactic, legislation that made national news just 3 months after Breonna was killed. But no-knock warrants continue to be applied for and approved throughout the United States, even though statistically they result in only small drug seizures and pose a high risk to the officers, the occupants of the home, and honestly, to anyone in homes in their immediate vicinity. Currently, only the states of Connecticut, Virginia, Florida, Tennessee, and Oregon ban the practice, but that doesn't affect federal officers, a policy that the current administration has said they may now limit in the wake of these 2 deaths and on behalf of all the other innocent citizens terrorized by the practice throughout the years. Amir didn't live in the apartment, as it belonged to his cousin's girlfriend. He'd been couch surfing among relatives for the holidays and was preparing to return home to Texas, where he'd lived for about 2 years since moving there with his mother. He worked a lot as a food delivery driver, but was an aspiring musician who had attended the high school for recording arts in St. Paul as a teen. He had just started building a company he named Saving the Youth, a program to help kids that he planned to fund by designing clothes. Texas relatives interviewed described the family as having a military and law enforcement background and called them extremely firearm safety conscious. Amir legally owned and had a Texas concealed carry permit for the gun he had in his hand when he was shot, according to his family members. The Reverend Al Sharpton gave the eulogy at his jam-packed funeral. No-knock warrants and the police shooting of Amir Locke quickly became the focus in the media, while Otis Elder's name was hardly mentioned in stories regarding developments in his murder case. Once all the warrants had been executed, a jacket like the one the assailant who got into Otis's passenger side was wearing was recovered from the third apartment, and it was eventually found to have mostly Faisal Ali's DNA on it. None of the 3 subjects were apprehended that day, and it took an additional 5 days before Speed was taken into custody in nearby Winona, Minnesota. They'd been trying to find him since they determined who he was, but neither his mother or probation officer could pin him down, according to police. When officers finally located him, he was wearing the jacket from the previous surveillance footage and had a loaded gun in his pocket. The only thing he reportedly said to police was, quote, "You guys killed my cousin." Mekhi Speed was charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder and will likely be tried as an adult, as under Minnesota law, juveniles over 15 will presumably face an adult trial if they were charged with a felony involving a firearm, or if the sentence for the crime would be prison. The prosecutor has petitioned to have him tried as an adult as well. At his arraignment, Speed's attorney said that his client had permission from his probation officer to go to Winona, that he didn't know police were looking for him and wasn't attempting to evade capture because he didn't know he was wanted. He was also charged with evading police and firearm possession in Winona County and had an outstanding property damage case. On February 18th, the DNA match from the jacket came in, and police arrested 16-year-old Faisal Ali, whom they allege was the individual who entered the passenger side of Otis Elder's SUV. Cell phone data placed Ali at the scene of the murder just prior to the first 911 call coming in reporting shots fired, and at the location where the stolen Mercedes was abandoned. In addition, his fingerprint was found inside that car. Ali's been charged as a juvenile with aiding and abetting second-degree murder while committing or attempting to commit a felony aggravated robbery, and a petition was filed to try him as an adult as well. He had been charged with felony burglary only weeks before Otis Elder was murdered. The Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension began an investigation into Amir Locke's death and compiled a report which they forwarded to the Hennepin County Attorney's Office on March 14, 2022. On April 6th, Hennepin County Attorney Mike Freeman and Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison released a joint report of more than 40 pages that details their decision not to press charges against the officer who shot Amir. Here's some of what they had to say in their press conference.
Amir Locke's life mattered. One thing Amir was not a suspect. Our investigation found no evidence that he had any role in the homicide investigation that brought the police to his door at 6:48 on February 2nd. Amir was a victim. He never should have been called a suspect. The role that County Attorney Freeman and I took on was to determine whether the current law permitted us to file criminal charges in Amir's death. As we announced this morning, we have determined that under the precedent and the laws that we have, we cannot file criminal charges. Current law only allows us to evaluate the case from the perspective of a reasonable police officer. And that language is from the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and relevant cases and statutes. We're not allowed to evaluate the case from the perspective of the victim. With all the available evidence, we would not be able to prove in court that Officer Henneman's use of force was not authorized under the law beyond a reasonable doubt. It would be unethical for us to file charges in a case in which we know that we will not be able to prevail because the law does not support the charges. And yet, a loving, promising young man is dead. His death leaves us with a wound in our community, but that is small in comparison to the wound that his family is suffering from. Communities have been torn apart by the trauma yet again, and the life of a police officer has been changed forever as well. If the law does not allow us to file criminal charges in this case, what can we do as policymakers, prosecutors, society, community to keep a death like Amir's from happening again? First, we need to interrogate whether no-knock warrants are ever really needed. There are inherent risks for everyone involved, including civilians and officers. Cities like St. Paul and even some states have stopped using them, and it hasn't hurt public safety. Yesterday, Mayor Frey issued another no-knock policy, which appears stronger than the previous one. Now this policy needs to be actually enforced and obeyed.
An excerpt from the statement of the officer who shot Amir included, quote, "In this moment, I feared for my life and for the lives of my teammates. I was convinced that the individual was going to fire their handgun and that I would suffer great bodily harm or death. I felt in this moment that if I did not use deadly force myself, I would likely be killed. There was no opportunity for me to reposition myself or retreat. There was no way for me to de-escalate this situation. The threat to my life and the lives of my teammates was imminent and terrifying." The news that her son's killer would not be prosecuted didn't sit well with Amir's mother, Karen Wells. She and other members of his family had a lengthy meeting with both County Attorney Freeman and Attorney General Ellison on the morning of their press conference, and once the decision was made public, she had this to say.
"I am not disappointed. I am disgusted with the city of Minneapolis. Can you imagine knowing that you'll never get to see your 22-year-old baby ever again? It is not right."
2 days after the announcement, on April 8, 2022, a new policy banning no-knock warrants went into effect for the Minneapolis Police Department. MPD officers may no longer apply for no-knock warrants or execute a standard search warrant without first knocking, announcing themselves and waiting for a minimum of 20 seconds in the daytime or 30 seconds at night before making entry. Of course, if it's deemed necessary, officers can still go in without doing any of the things I mentioned under a footnote to all such policies regarding exigent circumstances, like having to render emergency aid, to prevent harm or the destruction of evidence that's not narcotics, or to prevent a suspect from getting away. But this is a great stride, as waiting 30 seconds to make entry is the longest any city or state banning the practice has enacted. As it stands, Mekhi Speed and Faisal Ali have been charged in relation to Otis Elder's murder, but no one will be charged for killing Amir Locke. Their deaths, it appears, will save lives, as the banning of no-knock warrants in the city of Minneapolis will certainly make the citizens and officers safer. It just stinks that people have to die to change laws. Otis's fiancée laments the fact that his name doesn't ring out as Amir Locke's has.
Otis was an amazing guy, an amazing father. He loved his children. He was an amazing brother, an amazing son, friend. Otis was very loved by everybody that he came in contact with, everybody. So at the end of the day, everybody's crying. They want justice for Amir. But what about justice for Otis? What about me? His 4 kids. Those are the real victims. But I don't want him to forget about everything else that's going on.